Where's my blackboard? I was looking for this.
Bob, are we ready back there? Okay. All right. Call a workshop to order. Commissioner Smith, if you'll give us a prayer and a pledge, please, sir.
Our fathers, once again, we come before your presence. Thank you for this opportunity for us to be servants of your city. We ask for your blessings upon this meeting. We pray to God that all that is said will be pleasing and acceptable in your sight. Help us, Heavenly Father, to be agreeable and that we will do what's in the best interest of this city. In thy Son, Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Well, it's been a while since we've done a joint planning council meeting together, but anyway, glad to have our planning commission here with us tonight. Jim, you want to get us started in kind of the history of the KPI and then?
Yes, sir. Jim Hick, Community Development Director. I'm going to drop that a little bit for me because I'm shorter. So this is in regards to the Kelly Park Interchange, the form-based code. This was originally adopted back in June 21st, 2017, and incorporated into the Land Development Code with an update on March 16th, 2019 as Appendix A. The Kelly Park Form-Based Code was started originally in 2009 as part of the Wekiva Parkway Interchange Plan. There was a requirement by the Wekiva Parkway and Protection Act itself. The KPI, which I'm going to refer to as KPI from now on, area functions to support the movement of people and goods and is designed to complement the surrounding area while protecting the water and wildlife resources. That's one of the primary concerns. The 1 mile radius from State Road 429 and the Kelly Park Road intersection is the location. There are 5 main overlay districts, design districts to start that include the interchange itself, which is right at the interchange, of course. The village center, there's two village centers on the east and the west side of the interchange itself. Transition, which we also have 2 portions of the transition district. There's an employment district, which is primarily on the south. This is where we have some of the warehousing, and there's also a small portion on the north side. And then the neighborhood, which is our least density, those are single-family homes that kind of surround the area. And on September 19th, 2018, we did add the MedTech district, which takes into account the Orlando Health property that's off of FE Drive on the north side, northwest side of the interchange. The purpose of the Kelly Park Interchange Form-Based Code standards is a guide to the future development within the 1 mile of the interchange itself and the creation of a sustainable community that supports regional markets dependent on the Wekiva Parkway's function, which is to move people and goods. This includes light industry and warehousing, hotels, motels, restaurants, gas stations, truck stops, and convenience stores. It also promotes economic growth and diversity, and it's designed as a complement to the surrounding area and manages and protects water and wildlife resources. The form-based code regulations use physical form rather than a separation of land uses themselves as their organizing principle for the community itself. The primary intent of the form-based code regulations is to shape the public realm by addressing elements such as street design, public open space, and building form and placement. One of the big things about the KPI and the form-based code itself is that it is all public. There are no private roads or private communities in this area. For tonight's discussion, as all of you know, we did send out the form-based code with some edits that the applicant has provided. This project itself includes over 304 acres and crosses 5 of the design districts. The developer has attained an overall bubble plan for the districts and the employment district, which has also been approved for warehousing and is located on the south side of Sadler Road, the Sadler Road extension. The developer did meet with staff and the mayor on Tuesday, January 16th of this year, at which time they did inquire about meeting with each of you, City Council and Planning Commission, separately. staff did recommend that rather than separate meetings, that we hold a joint meeting to provide a consistent information to both city boards. The Wild Oaks developer also let us know that they did have a red line version of the desired amendments to the KPI form-based code that they did feel was needed for the development to succeed. At this stage, as most of you have already looked at, there are a little over 200 edits to this proposal. There was no draft site plan or reasoning provided for the multitude of amendments that were being asked for, so the context of them did seem extremely extensive with no justification and covered virtually every page of the 114-page document. The red line codes were supplied to the city staff on January 24th of this year. There are extensive edits, and staff has only had about 2 weeks to prepare our first draft comments, which you also have received. These are brief, but do reflect many of the areas that the staff does not agree with. Utilizing all of the proposed amendments does look to reduce the form-based code effectiveness and the intentions of that code. There are areas that the staff has been looking at amending and could be included in the next batch of glitch amendments. Some of these are included in the recommended amendments that the developer has also recommended. We can coordinate with the developer on many of these. With that being said, I'd like to turn the podium over to I believe it's Joe. You're going to talk first from the Wild Oaks and to present their proposed amendments and make some comments.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Howdy, folks. I appreciate everyone's time tonight, and I wanted to liken what I think we're faced with now after the groundbreaking is maybe the equivalent of we've had the pep rally, and now the hard part, which is, running past that 240-pound linebacker, which is the marketplace and all of the challenges that will come with this Wild Oaks development. So I am up for it. We have a great team assembled, and I think the city has a great team that we can work together on so many of these things. What I wanted to just express tonight is we view this as a working session. We need your all's help to think through the plan, to think through the code. As Jim said, we have 5 of the uses. I think we're the only developer who has so many of them in one project. And we are, to date, have spent well into 7 figures on civil engineering, master planning, architecture, research on the retail, and we're at the point now that the groundbreaking is done where we really want to work collaboratively. And I know a new economic development officer has been added to the city staff. There are so many challenges in front of us in order for us to be able to attract a great collection of tenants and co-creators and developers to invest their money in what is a really difficult market right now, particularly for developers to borrow money. So we didn't know any other way to get the discussion started than to bring a whole team of experts together and try and mark up what we think are suggestions. That's all. And from my board's perspective, I should also share that I'm a little bit of an army of one, because there's certainly a sense on my board to say, we're okay with the form-based code. We can make some small changes to it. Let's take the win and do something that is not pioneering in nature, and it will come out fine. And we don't want to push the envelope too hard, because we may fail and we may actually make less of a return on our investment. And it may, instead of taking us 3 to 5 years, it may take us 7 to 12 years. And I respect that. And the same way that I respect that the code today represents the rules, but I also have a lifetime committed to this master planning and real estate development. I've been involved in some great real estate deals, some horrible real estate deals, and there's one success that we had that was in some regards very similar. It ended up to be 4,200 multifamily units where we acquired about 80% of the developable land on a 330-acre peninsula that required that we knock down about 6.5 million feet of shuttered manufacturing buildings. That's where Pitney Bowes was started. It was where Mr. Pitney met Mr. Bowes. It was where the Tumbler Lock was founded. There was a tremendous amount of industrial history, and by the mid-70s, it became abandoned, and those jobs moved someplace else that was more economical. And I became involved in the early 2000s. Fast forward 20 years, project's a major financial success. 3,800 of the 4,200 units have been built, rented, sold, money was made, except we were right at the outset of the project, just like this, and I was too young and not forceful enough to stand up and say, there wasn't enough retail that was permitted. And at the end of the day, I went back internally to my team, and I had bosses and the folks who had invested in the money. It was mostly school endowments, and they said, take the win. Just do it. It's a winner. Why push the point? The city at the time wanted to protect the businesses that were on the other side of I-95. And we said, okay, we'll do it. And that is about where I feel like we are today. And I don't want to move forward without at least having spent the time and the money to show images tonight of what at least our reading of the code says we're not able to do. So if I can show those pictures of what we can't do tonight, we as a team can all decide, do we want to change the code to be able to try and do that? And if we can't, we're totally fine. And as I said, I'm a little bit of an army of one on my team. And I just go back to, Vero and the board's like, okay, just take the win. So that's the spirit in which we're coming tonight to this. This is in no way, shape, or form an argumentative position, or we take this or leave it. We bought this property. The code existed. It's no surprise to us. We can live with it. But we just want to see if we can work as a team together. You all heard me say I'm so proud of the fact that we always win 5-0, 5-0, 5-0, 5-0. I only want to do something if it's another 5-0 and everyone loves it. So with that, I'm going to let my team present more formal remarks. Those were a little bit of emotional and heartfelt remarks. So thank you.
I just want to remind everybody, this is a 2-hour workshop, so we're looking at about an hour, 45, 50 minutes right now. And you want the PowerPoint, right?
Are you the official timekeeper, Jim?
No, I'm not the timer. I think this is... There you go. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Great. My name is Jim Constantine. I'm a principal of planning with the firm of LRK here in Orlando. And our firm, architects, planners, are one member of a multidisciplinary team that includes lots and lots of other folks. And you'll hear this evening as well from Bob Gibbs, who's our retail consultant. So we wanted to first just walk everyone through where our site is located and the number of districts that it entails. So outlined on the screen, so you guys see it, all right, is the site there off the 429 at West Kelly Park Road. And I think, as was already mentioned, we encompass and touch on and incorporate in our holdings a number of the districts that are in the Kelly Park interchange area. Probably no one else has this many of the districts within there. If we look at what's been happening out there in blue, we've indicated some of the single family recent development that's sort of surrounding us from the south to the west and northwest. In pink, you see a couple of the commercial developments, but compare the size of those again to the multi-district area that we encompass. And I think we're really testing a lot of different provisions of different uses and elements of the form-based code. So this takes us in a little closer. We spun around now. North is to the left. West Kelly Park Road is up there. So we touch on all of these districts within the KPI. And we have been testing the form-based code and actually beginning to apply it to try to understand how it applies, what's possible, are there places that there's some issues. So let me just explain, and I'm going to learn to use this pointer here. Okay, here we go, great. So obviously 429, West Kelly Park. So this is one of your key intersections, Golden Gem in West Kelly Park. So the quadrant that we have, whoops, sorry there, go back, incorporates a village center area. And you'll notice in here that we have a large green space that leads to the transition zone to the south. That's wild green, which also connects up here to another large open space. And these aren't the only parks and open spaces, but I just wanted to identify, and Joe referred to that as yonder when we were at the groundbreaking. If we wanted to compare the size, flip back here, the size of wild green is about half of, for those of you that are familiar with Winter Park, about half of the size of Central Park. Yonder is actually larger. Here is Winter Park. There is Central Park on the Park Avenue side. So you can basically start to see some scale. And by the way, our village center is comparable in length to what you see there at Winter Park. Another scale comparison, and it's a community that we have a lot of experience in, is Baldwin Park, if any of you are familiar with that in Orlando. So, whoops, and that didn't show for some reason. Go back through that again. Ah, there it is. I'm sorry. It was in the slide before. So there is the length of New Broad Street in the core of Baldwin Park, and again, similar in scale. And I know that Joe shared these during the groundbreaking, just as a scale reference to understand just how much land is out there, and it's quite significant. I am about to say that. You read my next slide, because I wanted to talk about the vision, and in fact, we fully endorse and support and want to be part of bringing to reality the vision that you've set with the form-based code. And I understand some of the comments that Jim made a concern. I would be too in the staff's shoes. And by the way, we also work for public jurisdictions, and we work for public jurisdictions in some places, actually writing and administering form-based codes and doing design review. So you want to create this great special place and put the city on the map, and we endorse that. Our firm has spent the past 25 years at Celebration, where we actually serve as the town architect. We review everything that happens at Celebration on behalf of the various development entities that have controlled it. We've also probably designed more buildings in Celebration to the world's thickest form-based code and design regulations. At Baldwin Park, we've been involved similarly for the past 2 decades, and really are the vision keeper as the town architect, the review architect at Baldwin Park. We've also designed significant portions of it, of all different building types in all different neighborhoods there as well. And in fact, in our role at Baldwin Park, we work as the town architect, working for the master developer, working hand in hand with the city planner that's assigned to Baldwin Park from the city of Orlando. And one of the things that we have learned in the process of being part of these long-term, we call it vision keeper, because we really take that role, very seriously. And by the way, Orlando understood that the design review role was incredibly important from the lessons learned out at Celebration, that we have developed in working with our counterparts in the public sector, sharing the desire to be the vision keepers, that we need also flexible provisions. And so actually what doesn't get discussed in projects like Baldwin Park is that there's ability for waivers and flexibility in interpreting some of the design provisions. So it's not the letter of the law, a letter of the code that necessarily defines everything. It's also a process of finding the right fit, unique sites, crafting things in place. What happens if we did this here or allowed something to happen that's not in the code, but it meets the intent and purpose, keeps the vision. And that's really the spirit of vision keeping. So as Jim articulated, this is really meant to create a vision for public space and streets, and also spaces like parks that you see down below in Winter Park that we're going to share some images of tonight, because we think it's, again, another great local example. And one other thing that we noted in the introduction of your section of your code is that the regulations are intended to encourage diversity and variation. Physical form, in this case, that would be applied really across a whole variety of different uses, scales, and densities. And that's sort of the challenge when you're writing one of these codes, because it's often hard to envision every application. So with that said, we think there's lots of things that the code absolutely does well and that we can meet and embrace and work with. But we also, as we've been testing it and kind of truthing it and looking at some of the provisions, we've identified some potential challenges. And that, as Joe indicated, is really what we want to share tonight. We have found that there are provisions that work. There are others that have raised question about intent or how would this be interpreted, because we're having trouble interpreting it. And I would argue we probably have one of the greatest depths of knowledge of interpreting design-based codes in this region. And then there are places where there are provisions that appear to actually be in conflict with one another. So this section says this section says that, and that, absolutely exists in all codes. And that's part of this whole process of having waivers and flexibility that we've discovered really allows for that to allow these to evolve in a way that's practical and that also doesn't freeze the project in place, because there is no code that's perfect. I have written dozens and dozens of design codes, and you cannot write the perfect code. So some of these are technical issues, some are design issues, some are procedural issues. I'm just going to try to walk you through some of these at a high level, because I'm not sure in the red line that we passed up, it would be hard to look at that and understand intent and maybe some of the application. First of all, I want to say that with regards to a lot of the building type and the way it should meet the street and create a dynamic public realm like you see pictured here. And by the way, this is Eddy Street Commons at Notre Dame. This is one of the mixed-use town center projects that our firm has designed. We're using the 10-foot sidewalk setback zone that's in the code. This building right here and this street would meet the code. So we think there are lots of places where we can build things that would meet the code. However, if we wanted to do something like place a portion of a restaurant's cafe curbside, which is a very prevalent condition in Winter Park, it's not permitted by the code. This sort of condition is not permitted. And it's not for necessarily every restaurateur, but right now you're saying the only place they can be is basically those tables that are closest to the restaurant itself and not curbside. We think diners make the choices, but the one thing we do know is that pedestrians love the experience of walking through the middle of outdoor dining, and we'd like to have that flexibility. Or up in West Palm Beach or down in West Palm Beach, They have been doing extensive work in creating shared space street plaza conditions. This is Clematis Street. They also have Rosemary Square, places where you're driving through, but it feels more like you're in a plaza. And again, your plaza definition doesn't quite allow that, and the street types that are in the code wouldn't quite allow this. We'll tell you that there is a revolution going on. It was really fueled also by the pandemic because outdoor spaces just became utilized more. So this sort of wonderful piece of street, restaurants engaging in there, slow moving traffic, again, wouldn't be permitted by the code. There are places where we might want to have a combined sidewalk cafe on a side street. This is just 12 feet from building face to curb. Again, that would not be permitted under the code. We also think there's some questions about one-story buildings. We want to see mostly mixed use, multi-story type configurations, but there's a need for some one-story retail for certain users. Bob Gibbs can speak more to that. And we see in the code it says not encouraged. We've seen an interpretation say it's actually not permitted. We think there's a place for it. And here's Baldwin Park. A portion of their mixed-use village core, most of it's multi-story, but a portion of it is single-story. And so we think that kind of flexibility is essential to deliver a great place. Another community that we've been involved with recently is the new Waterside at Lakewood Ranch. There's conditions where public space actually integrates food and beverage uses with it. And we think that's a great way to make public space more active and vital in a village center. Again, the code doesn't seem to have a place for that. So we have sort of a question on that. But these are things that we think could make for a fantastic vision. And then lastly, this is a block part of the village center that we designed in Baldwin Park. That can be built under the code. So what we're trying to point out tonight is there's definitely some things that work. There's some other things that we think can make for a terrific place that don't have a location right now and a permissibility under the code. And we'd like to try to expand on the dialogue, as Joe was saying, to basically try to find ways that we might look at that. So now let's look at some additional potential challenges we identified in the range of we talked about the flexibility in the setback zone that we'd love to have particularly for outdoor dining and maybe some retail display. We'd like to also explore expanding a range of permitted building types. That's what we really found was probably one of the more siloed sections of the code that we'd like to adjust. And then there's some things regarding block dimensions. So let me show you a few examples on that. Start with block dimensions. Here's Baldwin Park Village Center. I think a number of you said you're familiar with it. So we're going to look at a couple of blocks right in the core. The Main Street core is New Broad Street right there. And if we look at this block right here, the short dimension on the Main Street, 325 feet in length, meets the code. The longer dimension of 675 is way beyond the 400 feet. However, that block length there, if you were to go to, for instance, Winter Park, from Park Avenue to the back of the first blocks in their retail core, it's 740 feet. So one of the things we flagged was the 400-foot dimension, and we'll look at it a little more closely here in terms of what's happening in terms of uses in the block, and particularly a requirement that we have active ground floor uses everywhere. So there is that same block. We're spun around. New Broad Street is at the top. The two blocks at the top, center, and right with mixed-use buildings meet the mixed use, would meet everything in your code. In fact, you have pictures, I think, of both of these blocks in the code as examples of what to do. And there's also some passages that break through those blocks that you see there in blue. However, every other frontage in here runs into a problem with the form-based code. And this is an example, we'd argue, of one of the region's best mixed-use village centers, like you're trying to encourage with your vision, and we just want to figure out a way to get there. So what doesn't work? We have some single-story retail here that's actually part of a hybrid building that becomes attached to a multifamily building that also includes a garage. It looks a little brutal from up above, but that whole multifamily, this whole block, we might argue on the retail, we could You could maybe make it fit. The multifamily building doesn't actually meet the definitions that you have, is you have a multifamily building that needs to look like a large single-family home, or you have a complex of buildings. But what I'm showing you right here on the left, with the pool courtyard, with the other courtyard, with the parking garage, sometimes referred to as a Texas donut because of the prevalence of how this building form came from Texas to all other 50 states. This particular building type doesn't have a place that permits it in the form-based code. On the next block in purple, the live-work units that you see located right here are also permitted in the code, but not in the village center, which is the place you'd most want to have them. And they're used here as a transition, we'll show you a little bit more on that, from the mixed-use core on New Broad Street heading back. And then the multifamily and townhomes, because they don't have active ground floor uses with a lot of exposure because they're living spaces, again, wouldn't meet the code. And that's also the problem with the multifamily. So let me take you down to the bottom of the street there with the little V arrow. And by the way, we're pointing this out in an effort to really try to help everybody understand what we'd like to try to work with staff on and the city to try to make work within the code that right now are some limits. That's that street view right there. So I mentioned we don't have a place in the code that allows these town center multifamily buildings. And the sort of building you're seeing on the left is, it's pretty typical 4-story urban type multifamily, something you'd want in a village center. It's got some terraces and balconies. It does a little color treatment to try to offset the 4th story. It's a little different than what's permitted in the code, which would actually require a step back. But that's what that looks like. The work-live units, as I mentioned, aren't permitted in the village center. And then the type that you define says they have to be an up and down unit, and the ground floor can only be commercial. Well, what you're looking at here in these two regional examples are ones where the ground floor actually is a flex space. It can be residential or commercial use. And often, as you can see from some of the signs, this is not prime retail use. This is back office space. It's the lawyer that has a small little office at home or near home. Or in some cases, as you see on the right, some of the units are residential right next to the ones that are used for some sort of light commercial activity. And so, again, we think in the village center, we need things that we know work in the region. That's not a major use. It's something that kind of fills in gaps at some particular places and side streets. We also discovered in the design section, and by the way, writing architectural codes is the most difficult part of a form-based code. But we found a whole series of little provisions that raise flags. One actually relates to style itself. The code doesn't say you have to have a specific style, but it says classically derived styles, and then it lists about 6 of them. We think that needs to be expanded, and in fact, the building that you're looking at here, which I know Joe believes is something he'd love to see built here at Wild Oaks, doesn't meet the code. It's classically derived, so there's Mediterranean revival, Southern coastal style, coastal contemporary, modern contemporary, Spanish colonial, postmodern, Art Deco, industrial, that are all Florida styles that aren't permitted explicitly in the code. And we think the place would be richer with an expansion of styles. And we say that as designers because we think the diversity is great. By the way, that's a building that we designed at La Cantera outside of San Antonio. This is another building, Generation Park. This is a rendering, but it was recently completed. Now, this building runs into problems with some of the color and building treatments. This is actually a singular building, but because it's a long block, we've broken it into 2 pieces so that you don't get this massive building that goes for hundreds of feet. However, your code says that a single building has to be treated uniformly on all sides and would actually call for this building to become a larger, more massive design building. So the other thing is it has some color provisions. Material treatments, so again, we're looking to try to work with you to create flexibility so that on larger blocks where there's multifamily above retail, just like you envision in the code, we can design some of these ones to larger ones to actually look like multiple buildings versus a singular long building, which your code right now would require. And then lastly, with regard to some of the style diversity, we think, again, some contemporary buildings like you see here, again, don't have a place in the code. We wanted to point out as some of the buildings in the core, if we achieve the vision that you've set, which, as Joe indicated, is a risk. There's a lot of risk in trying to make this happen and really create this active core. We'd like to try to focus density where it makes sense in the heart of the village center, so it's a truly lively place. These buildings have some signs that you see that are all in scale for the individual buildings and also do some creative things. There's a couple of little roof signs in here as well. While the signs are all in scale of these buildings, none of these fit the 200 square foot limits within the code. And we do think here, particularly because of your topography and the fact that there actually are views to downtown Orlando, and I always say to other folks, views for downtown Orlando to see this city, put you on the map. We think we'd love to see some opportunity to have some signage that also could be expressive for the entire Wild Oaks Village Center. So then last, just sort of talking about some open space issues, and we really are suggesting that there should be greater flexibility in designing the types of open space, and then some master planning flexibility to create networks that really go beyond. Right now, there's some very individual categorization or typologies for the different types of open space. But for instance, we think there's other types that are essential and terrific, but aren't permitted. So one of those would, first, parks like this, surrounded by streets, fronted by homes. We can do it. This is an example of one that we designed, all of the surrounding buildings at Baldwin Park. This is permitted. So again, I'm reinforcing, we're not saying the code, we're saying the code absolutely works in certain provisions. So we can deliver something like this. But if we wanted to go and put a muse space, a linear green space, promenades or some linear courtyards, any of those sorts of treatments, that's actually something that doesn't have a place in the code today. And these muse spaces are absolutely terrific to front townhomes on. I think we have one interested party that would love to do something like this as part of the village center. There are extensive networks of these at Baldwin Park. We can't count these as open space or get credit for it, but it's public open space and it's accessible. And then there's also the ability, or we'd like to see the ability to somehow credit some portion of semi-public courtyards where multifamily may be providing a gift to the street in terms of this wonderful open court, which we think in some ways is nicer than a 4-story wall of apartments, but this green space may have limited access, may have semi-public access, and so we're just suggesting that in some cases we may be able to do more of these, but there is an open space benefit visually to the community. Right now it's not credited. And then one last point on open space, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bob. We pointed out yonder up at the top. We did the groundbreaking for any of you who were there. In the middle of yonder, Joe speaks passionately about it. Not all open space is created the same, and there is an additional effort to try to go in and preserve these wonderful heritage oaks. And for any of you that weren't at the groundbreaking, this is one of those trees that's out there. And so we do think that, again, in looking more flexibly at the entire open space network and how we can link things together and sight lines and go from small parks to muse to promenades and connect up to the preserved heritage oaks, that the code couldn't envision all that. Nobody could have. But we'd like to find a way to bring that into the process to create the best possible place. So that's what I have to explain walking through. And right now I'd like to turn the podium over to Bob Gibbs. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Bob Gibbs. I'm here to assist with the retail planning and development. Before we start, should we just ask you if there's any comments or questions before we switch gears here? There. I'm Bob Gibbs again. I'm here, the retail specialist, to advise on the retail development. And I guess my background is specializing in planning and designing complex mixed-use centers. I'm one of the original developers of the form-based code back in the 1990s. And at the time, I want to just give a little background about that. At the time, we went around the country and measured and photographed what we considered to be the best downtowns. You know, Ocala, Winter Park, Charleston, Savannah, Palm Beach, Naples. And we found they all had certain common characteristics, the street width, building of the height and such. And we put all of the best in one code. You know, the best building height, the best store designs into one code. And it sort of became a super form-based code, which I published books on, and has really, I recognize a lot of that in your own code. And what we found out is that none of the places that we modeled it after are allowed under the code that we created, because we just picked the best parts of each city, and not every city is perfect. There's a few that have been built to be perfect, but they're very boring, and nobody likes to go there. So what we're recommending now is that the best of the best be the aspiration and the guideline, and that there be a number of things that have to happen. But in order to create places that have, where you can get emotionally connected to, or where you really like, there has to be some market base to them. For example, Seaside, it would not be allowed to be built today. Seaside would be illegal to build up in the Panhandle. Same with Alice Beach. Same with Rosemary Beach. Same with Ion in Charleston. Almost every other great places that was built under the new urbanism is now illegal to build, because, frankly, my code and Jim and others have been codified into the 8th commandment or something. It has to be done this way, and it doesn't work that way. These places that we love, this is Old Town Alexandria, have imperfect sidewalks. They have sidewalks that are great, sidewalks that are not. They have places where people can park. People, of course, want to go and park nearby. And what we have found is that in many of the new towns, this was planned by LRK, many of the new towns that follow these codes just aren't meeting the market. This is a great exception to that rule, but many of these new towns that have been built, in fact, I estimate that 3/4 of the new towns that have been built since the 1990s have gone through a default, and they have not been successful because the market was so held back with the parking or the signage or the size of the building. There's a lot of these codes. We just worked on one in Utah that was built and failed because the supermarkets weren't allowed to be more than 5,000 square feet. Well, that's something that we prescribed in the 1990s, but it doesn't work. So what this team is trying to do is to take those idealized by-the-book codes that we all wrote in the 90s and to use that as a starting point, but to build in flexibility so that the market can work there. Speaking of the market, I've been retained to do a sophisticated market analysis of what kind of restaurants and shops and services would work in this location. And we found that there is an extremely strong net demand for really nice restaurants, shoe stores, clothing stores, art galleries, furnitures, grocers, that will sort of hit the mid to mid-upper market. I don't know if you know this, but I'm a demographer. The I-4 corridor is considered as America's Main Street. The I-4 corridor has the exact profile of almost all demographic, age, educational, income, political groups in the United States. And when a new restaurant wants to do a test kitchen, or when a new children's store wants to try a new store, they immediately want to go to the I-4 corridor. Because if it can work here, it can work anywhere in America. And our peer reviews that researched our analysis said yes, heck yes. We want to be in Northwest Orlando. As a matter of fact, there have been thousands of new stores that have announced they want to open in the next 5 years in the United States. Since COVID, it turns out that women now are wearing slacks and shoes, and men are wearing shirts and jackets, and people are getting dressed up again. Children are going to school, they're wearing nice clothes again. And there's this groundswell to build new retail in the country, but especially in Florida and especially along the I-4 corridor. So our analysis showed that the town center can support really great restaurants and shops for a whole gamut, from that young single mother, that young single parent, all the way to the young professionals, to the empty nesters, that this place can attract really great restaurants, cafes, delicatessens, shoe stores, art galleries, and such. They'll want to go here. And those retailers are not going in malls anymore, as you probably have read. They don't want to go in malls. They want to go into places like this that LRK designed. They want a real main street, but they want real parking. They want to be able to park nearby. They want a place that's centrally managed so that the streets are clean, the windows are washed, it's safe, and all of that. They also want to locate in communities that care, that have a master plan. The fact that you have a form-based code is a huge plus because it gives them predictability. If they're going to spend $1 million or $2 million opening a restaurant or a cafe, because of your code, it gives them a predictability that the other ones down the street will be good too. So it's a long way of saying is that we're very bullish on this location. The community has really a full gamut of market options, from very modest types of businesses to mid-level to upper, or a mix of all three. And at this point, our group really needs the help from the community. We need you to guide what types of businesses would you like to be here. The choice is pretty broad. I don't get to say that very often anymore, but you have a lot of wide choices. And we need help from the planners to take these form-based codes that we invented in the 90s to apply it to modern urbanism, modern lifestyles, to really provide a place for people to park, but to provide things to an upper level. So I'm going to stop there and just say I'm delighted to be here. We will need the community's help to pull these off. These cost a lot more to build than strip centers. The development team's going to have to go and pitch hard to get the restaurants here over strip centers. And the opportunity's there. This is an extraordinary opportunity. We do this all over the world, and this would be one of the best markets we've seen probably in the last 5 years or so. So with that, I'd be happy to take questions, or I know I've gone long-winded. Any comments?
I've got a few just to kind of get us started. So in the presentation, we had, I think it was one of the concepts of a modern word design aesthetic, and saying that our code would prohibit something like that. But if I look at our current code right now, Building Design Standards, Section K1 Architecture, it clearly says there's not a requirement for a specific architectural style. So that would tell me that if you wanted to go that route, you could, because nothing in that code would preclude us. Now, it seems like there's some interpretation issues going on. So maybe Section K1 contradicts something further elsewhere within the code. But again, I think those discrepancies are stuff that, to me, seem fairly boilerplate in the natural kind of design and approval of designs, normal course, I would say. So I guess at this stage, what has led you to today? Have you had interactions with staff and you're not getting the answers that you want? Because some of these things, it was pretty daunting when we get 100 some odd page document and there's a lot of red lines. And so for me, I'm trying to prioritize what's most important versus stuff that's down the line that may be administrative in nature, or at the very bottom where we're squabbling over the naming of or definition of something where there's not really a clearly defined definition anyways. So to me, when I first read this thing, the big chunks are density, right? I mean, there's red lines within the form-based code where there's a desire to have townhomes within the neighborhood district, or the addition or insertion of townhomes within the transition district, which I would argue is really meaningless because it already talks about medium density residential anyways, which is a townhome. So just kind of talk to me what the interaction has been with staff. If there's any friction at this point, or this is just a thought partnership type of conversation.
This is a thought partnership Tara Tedrow, by the way. This is a thought partnership conversation. Joe bought this property. I mean, this is a multi-year process that we've been working on this, because when I had a conversation with your staff this morning, I saw the comments back, a lot of no's or why's, and I said, guys, I just don't want you to think this was meant to be adversarial. It wasn't meant to be a criticism of your code. I can promise you Joe doesn't just pay a ton of consultants for the fun of us talking, 3 times a week and having hundreds of hours put into just that code revision that you saw. We figured if we were going to go through an undertaking like this, figure out everything. What is the most ideal world of a code change? What would it look like? Because if we're going to send it all back, it's going to get pared down. We understood that. We wanted to get forth something that said, these are the consultants, somebody who's been named one of the most influential urbanists of the century, Bob Gibbs on our team, right? LRK, who does this for a living for other municipalities of this design review. One of the biggest points we said is we wanted to give your staff more flexibility. We didn't want to take away flexibility from your staff. We wanted you to empower them to be able to make these types of decisions so that when we have a muse, which I didn't even know what that was until, we had our folks on our team and a lot of dollars spent on figuring some of these things out, tell us that this is green space, that's fantastic, but it wouldn't count. And if it doesn't count, developers aren't going to do it because you're already so constrained and you have so much density and intensity that was contemplated in these areas that simply cannot be captured. And so that is a huge net loss to developers when they see, I could theoretically get this many units, but now when we take the code and we have to do these block lengths and we have to chop things up, and I can't allocate my open space in a different way, it's just not going to work. And then they can't get the benefit that they thought they were going to realize on the front end. So we would like for your staff to be able to make bigger decisions on the back end, to be empowered to do some of those reviews. Or even if you had a consultant that acts in the way LRK does, that does some of those design reviews for plans that get submitted. Now your staff's pretty overburdened as it is, so I don't want to put more work on their plate to say, give them all this flexibility, but I really do think that they should be empowered to be able to live out the intent and the vision of this form-based code. And the other thing too is this project is unique, not just because of having 5 different character districts in it, the magnitude and the size of the project. You can chop this thing up and, Joe and his team can just sell it off to 30 developers and leave town and make money and everybody's happy, probably. Won't be as happy and probably not as good of an end product as if we comprehensively master planned a project and tried to keep it all and have a couple pieces here and there with joint ventures or selling off like you saw Madison Communities that came before your planning and zoning tonight with a wonderful multifamily product for our first phase of residential. So we're hopeful that we could start a dialogue. We apologize if it seemed like an exhausting read that we sent you, but it was really meant to start a conversation and then for us to show you this to say, hey, here are some of the things that we'd like to do that we don't feel like we can do. And if you say we don't want it, then we'll stop putting in all of the effort and take all the consultants off the clock and not put forth a 250-page written justification statement, which we would have otherwise done in addition to the code changes.
Yeah, I think, and not to comment your conversation, but I think, what we saw in the presentation, I would be hard pressed to think that anybody disputes that we want that vision. Mm-hmm. I think we're skirting around what the big meaty things are and some of the changes that are in here. And those meaty changes being, I'll just use the example, townhomes and the neighborhood district, which right now it's supposed to be only single family residential. The challenge that we have is that if we change the form-based code broadly, that broadly changes it for everybody, not just this particular development. So, and obviously we've all been a part of this process from start to, well, hopefully to finish. The biggest concern from our residents is, the infrastructure impacts and all this stuff. And so when we're talking about density, and it's density that was, some could argue buyer beware. You knew what you were getting into when you purchased this property. But on the flip side of that argument too, higher density will go to drive the success of a project like this, and then it becomes self-serving. And so people aren't necessarily getting in their cars to go out and do the stuff that causes there to be traffic on the roadways. So there's an inflection point that we have to consider during these discussions as well. I don't have a finish to that statement, but it's just, I would rather not gloss over just the easy stuff. Let's just really, I think the benefit of having the planning commission and the council jointly here is let's crack the big nuts and, really kind of driving that meaningful conversation.
Yeah, Commissioner Becker, your point about it becoming self-serving, if we can figure ways to bring our density from 3,000 residences to 4,000 residences here, the impact that will have to the restaurateur and to the retailer and to my vision that there could be folks who may visit family on a Sunday. I think I spoke to one of the reporters about this, and drives home and parks his car and may work all week here and go to 3 different restaurants, do an outdoor workout, an indoor workout at a gym, and have friends or a date on Saturday night and realize that he hasn't moved his car for 5 or 6 days. And I think that's possible, but the only way that becomes possible is if we have this sort of density here. And because we have the 429, because we have the new interchange, because we're fortunate enough that Kelly Park Road is going to be 4 lanes, thank goodness we're getting Golden Gem Road looking like it's moving in the right direction, Sadler going underneath the 429. We really have the infrastructure to be able to have that many folks come here. And the economic impact of the jobs that will create and the taxes that will generate. I know Mayor Demings was so thrilled to hear that there would be some more taxes coming through, but that's a function of there being a lot of economic activity. So that's everyone's goal. So I think you're spot on that that's exactly what will happen. Well, I'm left here for some other questions. So
I always have a whole bunch, so I'll go again if nobody wants to chat.
yeah, why not?
Well, I guess we really need to hear what it is that our staff is pushing back against that you're presenting that's going to prohibit you from developing the type of product that you want to develop. And I just heard you say about the increase in density. Is that one of the things that's prohibiting, or you're moving forward, is that you want to increase the density, but staff is not in favor of the increase in density?
I think that's a couple of things. And they relate to 2 points. With regards to density, there's been some, and it seems like it's a little bit conflicted in the code, but it's a bit unclear as to whether we can transfer density. And when we talk about it, talk about stranded density. When I talk about between 3,000 and 4,000 units, there could be 1,000 units that get stranded. And when I say stranded, meaning they're in one district, and we may be able to take a building from 3 stories to 7 stories, but we can't move it from one district to another district. And therefore, none of the jobs and none of the taxes that would have otherwise gotten created by that economic activity. So that's one thing that exists in the code. And this is now the second time I've heard, is there anything that staff has not done for us? We are in spring training. There's been nothing but cooperation, communication. It's so early in the process. We're probably pitchers, catchers, not even spring training at this point. So the second comment that I would make is the rationalization of open space is a substantial issue. We talked about that yonder being 10 acres and the Central Park in Winter Park being, it's really 4 acres, but if you include the other 2.5 on the backside of the railroad, that has a lot of density around that 6.5 acres, and it's very vibrant. When you're on Park Avenue, and I have been, and there's a movie being shown, and you see all the people in the community at an outdoor movie, even with a couple of thousand people in that park, it's still not really full. So with the yonder being 10 acres, and then we have that wild green in the center, I think we're getting to the point where they're almost too big. And when they get big, what happens is people tend to stick around the edges. That's the research that Bob's given us. They sort of are afraid to walk into the center of something that's 20 acres. And what I would also add with regards to open space is because we're so high, some of the points in the project are at 125 feet above sea level, which Florida is sort of like the Alps. And our water retention is all dry retention. So there's one dry retention pond that I think is 30 acres, 30. Am I exaggerating? It's 30 acres. So that space will, in a tremendous storm, when no kids are out playing and nobody's out recreating, will drain. In a terrible storm, will that drain in one day? 3 days. So a terrible storm, 3 days, kids can go back out and play there. They can play, any kind of sports. So that doesn't count as open space, but my concerns are that we're consuming so much of the acres with so much space, some of it being dry detention and some of it being open space, that again, we're losing the ability to create density and intensity, which is how the jobs get created, which is how the taxes get generated, and how the restaurants are able to profit, and how the wait staff is able to say, I'm not going to take that job in Hamlin because I can make better tips at Wild Oaks. And it's such a competition for staff, they will go to where they will be able to make the most money in tips. So those are the big, when we say, what are the big things that we can anchor to? Those are the big ones that concern me right now, that we, as I said, are in spring training and we can talk to staff about.
Mr. Missile?
Sure. No, thank you for asking for this meeting. I think it's very valuable for us, for the residents. It is a massive project. We obviously do want to see it be successful. Is there a way to get a copy of the presentation that you guys do have for all of us?
Absolutely.
Thank you. It's just very helpful for us to go back and look at it and just kind of see what the goals and ambitions are there, as well as you noted some of the issues that you guys are going to be going through, or what you guys kind of find hurdles. So I appreciated that as well. One of the things that I guess the question for tonight is your goal in this meeting right now just to see if there's an appetite to move forward with these conversations, or do you guys want to take a deep dive in each item? What's our goals tonight?
I think it's the former rather than the latter.
Okay, so it's just to see if there's an appetite to
Yes, sir.
let's keep massaging this a little bit and see
Yes,
where we
sir.
can find common ground.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I will say just for me on my end that there's definitely an appetite for me to kind of see this massage. My goal too would be a little give and take, because the more that we kind of massage this a little bit, the more successful your project is as well.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we can get a little bit more back for the residents that are currently here, whether it's specific park space, maybe not as big like you said, but maybe some specific type of parks, or we're definitely going to need some type of substations or things like that for our fire and police up there. So maybe something where we can work some things out that makes sense for you guys to continue your progress and success, but also to help us and we can kind of cooperate in that capacity. So that would be my thoughts, but I'm open to the conversation moving forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You need to use a different analogy than pitchers and catchers. He doesn't like baseball, so come on.
Sorry.
Come on.
Bob,
You can keep it with real estate. I'm good with real estate.
Commissioner, Gustler, you got any questions? Good, okay.
What Commissioner Becker said, I think that pretty much clarified the questions I had, and that this is, on the first rub, it looked as if we were changing a whole lot of code to fit one project, but now looking and hearing more, it's like maybe we need to adjust both sides, maybe a compromise. You guys compromise a little bit and the code needs to be adjusted to allow more of these things. And I think that's a learning process. You know, the city of Apopka hasn't built anything like this and don't have any experience with that type of code. And maybe that's a maturing process that we're going through now. So I feel very comfortable with what's been presented so far.
Commissioner Velasquez?
Wow, it's been a lot to take in, but I will say this form-based code was done so many years ago, and you're right. I mean, the demands for residential, retail, businesses has changed, and we're trying to build a Wild Oaks for 2009. And it just isn't going to work because you obviously have the experts that worldwide, you going around and you're seeing the transition of people coming from the North, from the Midwest. And so we are trying to accommodate a changing landscape. And we are kind of trying to keep you into a box. And so, I mean, what you have presented tonight just seems viable. It seems that it can work for us. Even, who thought 10 years ago that the 429 would bring this kind of, demand for us here. And it is. So, I mean, I'm okay with what you're presenting. Again, I'm going to agree with them that when I first saw the red lines, I'm like, well, are we changing the form-based code just for Wild Oaks, or are we trying to adapt? Because the form-based code was done so long ago. That was a vision for us back then. But of course, as time moves on and demands for families and how we want to live has changed.
And the code
completely.
really is good, as Bob said. The code is good. It's a great starting
It's a
point.
foundation.
It really is.
It
If
is
it
a
didn't exist, it
foundation.
would be a big problem.
Right, it's a foundation, but you're having some issues with some areas that you feel can be changed a little bit, can be tweaked, and still get the same result, right? Because is that what you're looking for?
Yes, that's the goal. And the concerns that we were talking about is the density, making sure that we're able to get as much as we can, because that's going to add the vibrancy, making sure that people can park, making sure that people like to use the parks and aren't frightened to go into the center of it because it's so vast. So those are the types of things that are on our mind as we continue to work this out. And I could see us having these, unfortunately, that's why I have a lot of young people on the team too. This is going to go on for years.
Yeah. I mean, just go around all of Central Florida and you see different types of residents, different types of neighborhoods, and you actually did present them. Celebration was a real big deal when they first came. Then Baldwin Park, and you can see the demand, and you can see the different families, how they're choosing to live in the communities that they want. And we certainly want that for Apopka.
It's exciting.
It is. The only thing I'm just concerned with is the phases, how you're going to build them, because we want to kind of have it so that if you do build residential, are we going to have some commercial and some retail coming in with them? I mean, I don't know how that works, because sometimes if you build one phase completely and there's nothing to support that phase, then it starts to, you won't attract what you want.
These large retailers are, they're tough.
Yeah.
And they push us around quite a bit because they have a lot of leverage. The better and more attractive that they are, the more they throw their elbows. So one of the reasons we hired Bob was to help us try and get our plan and get our code in shape to be able to attract them. And maybe, Bob, you can talk a little bit about that. Like, I've had a quick experience with Starbucks, but why don't you talk a little bit about their demands?
Well, but before Bob comes, let me ask the hard question.
Yes.
Where are these kids going to school?
Yeah.
Wow. I understand that to the east, there is a new school that is, that's planned.
West.
It's
Pardon me, to the west? Yes.
it's the high school where they have 100.
It's a high school,
Yeah.
second high school.
Right.
Well,
And that's gonna be where?
there's also there's an elementary school that they're working on right now as well.
Mhm.
It within Tony's development.
Is that right?
We were trying to get a K-8, but it looks like it might end up being an elementary only.
K-5?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so is that up by where the mushroom plant was?
That's where the high school
school
is.
That's
Yes.
where the high school
Okay.
is at.
The elementary will be just north of Kelly Park, and I want to say would be west of Golden Gym, I think, or right around Golden Gym and Kelly Park, just north of Kelly Park.
You know, Commissioner Smith, I shared this past week with our team. One of my sons sent me a research piece that talked about Texas comparing to Florida, and both of them attracting about 500,000 new people per year, 500,000. And states like Tennessee were 80,000. So they were definitely attracting a lot of folks, but there are just two behemoths that attract that number. But it went on, the research piece, to show that wealth transference, Florida to Texas, was substantially higher in wealth transference. Now, I know a lot of that's going down to the Miami, Palm Beach area, so a lot of rich folks going there in the financial industry, but it was orders of magnitude more, maybe 4 or 5 times. But the key part of the piece was it then compared the land mass, the number of square miles, and it was, I think, about 250 or 60,000 in Texas compared to about 65,000 in Florida. So the same amount of people coming each year, actually a ton more wealth coming than to Texas, and maybe 1/4 or 1/5 the amount of land. And we all know that a lot of that land in the southern part of the state, the Everglades, is not developable. So, when we talk about, when Bob talks about why do all of the retailers, the restaurants, the stores, why when you go to these retail conferences, all they want to talk about is Florida. And then they really want to talk about I-4.
There were a couple of specific things in the code, though, that I think should be looked at. And building these sorts of places is counterintuitive. For example, we find that the most popular busy squares and public spaces look too small on every plan. And I had some plans, I didn't bring them here. But every time we do a plan, and when the park looks like it's the right size, it's always way too big. Like Seaside, if you've seen Seaside, that park now everybody agrees was too big. When a park looks too small, it's usually the right size. And the larger things from the commercial point of view that I've seen is primarily the block size. The block sizes that we originally wrote in the form-based code assumed that the retail would be fully supported by people that could walk or ride their bike there, which is not workable. I mean, people are actually going to drive here and go to the restaurant. So the one thing from my point of view is that we need flexibility on the block sizes so that they can be large enough to accommodate people driving to the town center. Not every block. There should be some areas in which it's very tight, Charleston, Palm Beach, Ocala type scale, where you don't have much parking. But there's other areas where we need to have the blocks larger. For example, I believe the codes here are for blocks to be 400, 2 acres? 3 acres? 2 or 3 acres. I think the code is which I developed this code to make blocks 2 or 3 acres. The Jefferson code, Thomas Jefferson's blocks were 300 feet by 300 feet. When we looked at places like Winter Park, their blocks are 4 times that size. Their blocks are 5 acres with a half-mile circumference. We could not build Winter Park today with these form-based codes from the 90s because you have a large block. So one thing that would help us would be if we could have flexibility to accommodate blocks today, and then we like to design the blocks with the streets and edges so someday they can be turned into city walkable blocks. So we use the parking lots, we put the parking lots that are necessary today, the sizes, but we designed it so those parking lots can be turned into full city blocks with housing and retail and shops on them. So it's just a form of land banking. That allows us to build retail that is realistic because we can't do retail with parking structures today. Yeah, so the other thing, a big thing from my point of view is we need flexibility to have the tight blocks in certain areas that are going to be just walkable, and in other areas, like in Winter Park, where you have a 5-acre block. Winter Park has 4 5-acre blocks, which in this code would have to be broke down into 2-acre lots. It just doesn't work. The other then are the parks and squares. In the town center, we are going to propose a square which will be about a half-acre in size, which may seem small, but it's one where we want people to be compact. We want people to see each other and to have the buzz. So there's a couple we weren't going to get real technical today, but there are a number of things that we need your help with. We need the planning staff help to learn how to accommodate these modern demands to meet your values and your goals. They can be done. I do this all over the world. They can be done, but it can't necessarily be done on the day that we open. This is a 100-year town, and it'll grow. And it shouldn't be textbook perfect. I mean, we plan towns that are just textbook perfect. Everything in my book is built, and they're boring. Because there's some around here, there's some theme parks. They're just boring. And the places that people love, are a little weird. The sidewalk's a little too narrow in one spot. You have a couple of buildings that aren't that good to look at, a couple of signs that are too small or too big, but that's what gives it a place people love. And you can't do that by going by my old codes. You just can't. And because of that, a lot of the places that were built under my code now, I'm going back and they've failed. And the banks are hiring me to go back and to figure out, what's wrong. And it's always the same. We need to accommodate a Whole Foods size place. We really do need a place where Publix should go. We really do need to put parking lots in. People really do want to drive and park nearby. And so the reason we called this the new urbanism back in the 90s is that it's the best of urbanism, but it's for the new lifestyles and realities of today. So we really do need your help.
So let me ask you a question. Like on 50, where I think Bumby, where you have a Whole Foods, and that whole strip, I've driven through all of that. It seems very crowded, and parking is always an issue there.
Right.
I've yet to go into Whole Foods because the parking lot's always full, and there's no alternative to park anywhere. So at Wild Oaks, what is it that you want to do? A smaller parking lot, or what is it that our form-based code says that you can't do that you want to do? Especially in an area like what I'm talking about. You're trying to bring a strip, right, of retail smaller. And you're right, not everybody wants to walk to the store. They still want to drive, whether it's a block or 2 blocks. I've learned that here in Florida. Even if you can walk, they still want to take their car to it.
So, thank you.
And I've traveled to Winter Park, and I haven't visited a lot of the bakeries or the stores because when you get to the parking lot, it's completely full. And so I can't find another parking spot that's within a walking distance without feeling like I have to walk, across a busy road, or I have to park in the in the strip malls. And I'm not shopping at the strip mall, but I want to be able to go to that particular store. So walk me through that.
Thank you. That's spot on to what we find is that some codes, I can't address it here, but some codes put maximum numbers of parking spaces, or they manipulate where they can go. So statistically, you may have enough parking spaces for the restaurants and such, but they're in such odd places that you really don't. So, on paper, it makes sense to do that. But when you've got 3 kids in your stroller, in your basket, and you're going to carry 200 pounds of groceries out, you really do need to be able to safely get that in there. And so that's what we need. That's what the kind of flexibility we need. I mean, if we go, I'm not going to name names, but right now I'm helping a really popular grocer come into the Lakewood area, this area. They want to come here. They have requirements, like a gourmet grocer or a really great men's or women's clothing store. They will say, Joe, we love this area. It's our dream demographic, but we really do have to have parking in the front. And that means your block is going to be bigger than the code allows. And Joe's team can say, okay, we can do that, but we'll do it over a phase period. There's ways of making it work, but they're taking it out of my book and saying, okay, this is the way it's got to be. It just doesn't work. I mean, we made a mistake. We made the best of every city in one place, and we forgot the parts that aren't the best parts. So there's things about, we don't want to get into detail now, but there's things about the block size, from my point of view, are the number one thing. You couldn't build Winter Park today because the blocks are 5 acres. Now, there used to be Jefferson blocks. They used to be half that size, but that street got turned into a parking lot because after World War II, people really started driving to go to the stores. So I don't think we want to get detailed, but there's certainly block sizes, the placements. A lot of cities put the maximum number of parking. Now they say you can only have so much parking, and sizes.
Can I suggest something? Yeah. I mean, obviously we're not going to boil the ocean tonight, but can we kind of structure these or group these things into logical categories and have you all prioritize them? Because when I think about what I've heard tonight, I naturally go to the density one because I know that's where our residents are going to have the most concern, right? And so you kind of group things under density. That can include adding like the townhomes into certain districts, the story heights of buildings, could be floor area ratios, what have you, but things that really drive density or how these developments sit on the property. Form and function, that would be kind of the aesthetic kind of stuff, or the block sizes, things like that. There's some administrative stuff in there, what thresholds meet the test of having to go to the planning commission for certain deviations, so on and so forth. And then the fourth would be really wordsmithing. There's some wordsmithing stuff in there that's really not what I would deem super critical. Like you used a study before too, like right now people would have heartburn if you just went and said, hey, 10 stories is what we want as our max versus what's currently within the code. But there's studies that would then support the idea that the higher the development, the fewer amount of people in terms of daily vehicle counts that come in and out of that particular property. So it's not necessarily high stories, high density equals exponential growth in traffic, because there's studies to dispute that. So for me, it's more about those logical groupings, and within each of those groupings, what's the highest priority? Because again, I go back to one of the first things that you presented in here related to the cafes. Some parts of our code, if you read it, it says, and we encourage pedestrian interaction, i.e. through outdoor cafes. So it's, there's some conflicts maybe in the code, and that's maybe just a function of how staff would interpret it. Maybe they interpret it in the spirit of what you're trying to accomplish. But if you could prioritize those things, I think that would be super helpful versus us trying to go page by page and seeing how all these things fit.
I couldn't agree more. I think that I like to refer to that maybe as an issues list where we take, 4 or 5 categories and then we put 7 or 8 bullet points in each of those 4 or 5 categories. And then we can have a much more logical discussion as opposed to a markup of 151 pages with red lines that are difficult to get our arms around. So I think that's a great suggestion, Commissioner, and we're happy to do that. I am happy to keep, going tonight, but I know we're sort of sitting between everyone having supper and this being some fairly dense stuff. So if maybe we want to have one last question or so.
No, we're gonna go through. Get Commission Member Mock, got a question or two?
Yes, sir.
I read through the packet,
Mhm.
over 114, 15 pages. And the one thing that I picked up from that, and then your presentations tonight, especially these two gentlemen here, the vision that you all have and your expertise from years, having written something and then get to go back and reevaluate what you wrote and see people do exactly what you say, and now you're sitting here saying it was boring. I can tell you whether anyone, whoever's in favor of this or, development, I want to be in the country. I can tell you one thing for certain. Irregardless, across the board, and this has kind of been mentioned, no one wants to see this fail. You don't want this built and it be boring and only 50% come and occupy this. I know you've traveled the world. You've obviously got, I'm sure, a million pictures that you could show, of things. And I've been fortunate to have traveled to some cities where I sit down and when I walk through this central area, which is heavily utilized. I mean, you talk about certain places and they go, oh, go here. Go to this street, go to these 3 streets,
Right.
That type of thing. And as I look at the photographs that you've had this evening, several of them, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's the same place where I was. That's the same place where I was. That's where I went. I would go back there again. Why would I go back there again? Because it was an enjoyable experience. Did I like every store? No, but I loved just walking down the street, just being able to casually walk through there and have that good time. So I would say, you've brought on some very high-powered expertise. And I, sitting on the planning council, I wouldn't want to necessarily at this point stand in your way, because I can tell you, I don't have that experience. I can sit back and I can go, wow, that was okay. I don't really want to go back there again, but I really would love to go back here again. And to have that be successful, I'm not suggesting height of buildings and, occupancy and that type of thing, but to have the flexibility, if you need something that's 400 feet long and you want another one that's 675 feet long and one that's this, then I would suggest at this point in time in the world that we live in, we really seriously consider how we put those things together, because having something fail, and now, like, you came in and, Pitney Bows, now granted, we don't have much of that anymore, but to have the ability over a 100-year period of time to have flex, to have breathability and flex in that project, that's what makes that lasting. And the last thing that I'll say is, when I look at some of those photographs, and you tell me the people that are saying I-4, we're close to I-4, that's a vision. And to drive those people, I was in Salt Lake City and went to a place that's very similar to what looks here. You were mentioning the grocery store needing parking in the front. They actually had that in conjunction. That was a very large parking lot to walk across.
Mhm.
And I walked from this very neat, closed-in, cool place, and I walked over to this parking lot that allowed parking in front. This place was bustling. There was business, it was people, it was successful. So I would certainly support that.
Thank you, sir.
Commission Member Ryan.
You had some concerns about the 30-acre detention pond, or I would call it detention pond. Mr. Hill would call it dry pond. Is the water table, is it low in that area?
Hi, Kevin Robertson with Kimley-Horn. Yeah, the water table is over 20 feet in most of the areas of this project site.
Okay, because what had happened with Apopka Boardwalk is a developer wanted to build a daycare center and to use part of the retention pond to build on top of, build their daycare area, and it made the rest of the retention pond deep to compensate for it. Have you taken that into consideration?
We've played with the height of like the overall height, and then the just like we're also got a lot of elevation difference.
You maxed out the.
We've maxed out we've maxed it out. Obviously, we don't need we wouldn't make it 30 acres if we could get by with 20. Yeah. So yeah, there's other options in the future of maybe filling some of that in and doing an underground system in a parking lot, or there is some flexibility like that in the future.
What about, let me question for you, parking garages. Is there any planned in that area, parking garages?
Eventually, there will be.
Okay.
Eventually, as Bob talks about the
They do have
phases.
one in Winter Park, as you know, since you've been in Winter Park a lot. They have one off of Park Avenue, one off of 1792 behind 60 behind the restaurant.
Yes, and that feels pretty safe, that parking lot, at the one that's beside 60 Vine. It's well lit and you can pull in and out fairly easily. They're not everyone's favorite. There's actually nobody who is a fan of those parking garages, but there are things when we get to building them that aesthetically we're concerned about making them look nice from the outside and well lit and safe
So they have a
feeling.
behind.
Mhm. Yes.
They also have some regular parking. And you have a choice. But also, I have no problem with the increase in density. It's just the infrastructure. That needs to come first. For all the building goes on. That way it can be safe. I mean, your attorney has told the planning commission several times that you have agreed to bring up Old Gem Road city standards. It fronts the property. Is that correct?
We are actually contributing to Sadler, Effie, and Kelly Park Road, and Golden Gem has been the one that we've been more on the sidelines because of the county and city's relationship on Golden Gem. So that's the one that I'm least conversant on.
Well, your attorney on several occasions told me you would bring that up to city standards.
Well, that is correct. We've made a substantial contribution towards it to allow for its width with property. So we've given property to contribute to those
You told
standards.
me you would bring it up to Golden Gem Road up to city standards.
Commissioner Ryan, that's a project that Pam is working on with Orange County for those standards. We got to stick with this project or this item right now.
I'm not a fan of perfect that, but his attorney told us that in order to get our vote. Confidence.
It's incredibly important to us. That's why we're contributing that property.
Come on up.
Yeah, I was going to say that we've had 2 different agreements with the city for transportation approvals that were dedications of money and right of way in order for those extensions of Effie and Sadler, and then improvements to be made on West Kelly. And then one of those agreements does contemplate the ability for allocation of funds to go towards Golden Gem. So that was always part of the programming. So we dedicated everything that we could we can't take right of way across the street that's needed. We can't take over for county owned parts of Golden Gem until the city and the county figure that out. So that was one of the discussions that we had, was that we were doing everything that the city had asked to bring it up to standard.
You told me you would bring up Golden Gem Road that fronts your property up to city standard.
Correct. Everything fronting our property. We can't do anything else not on our property. So we don't have off-site current obligations under our development agreement, but everything fronting our property, yes, is brought up to city right-of-way standards, the sidewalk width standards, and those connectivity and access points. Correct.
And I would like to see that those roads brought up, Kelly Park Road brought up to city standard, and Golden Gem Road, you know. Right now, we've got, Jeff Summit, subdivision on Golden Gem Road. I can't remember the name of that subdivision.
Yeah, we've got a couple different subdivisions on Golden Gem, but that, again,
That road is.
we need to concentrate on this project, this item right now, and we'll delve into the roads at a different time. Need to stay on subject. Sorry.
Well, that's part, Golden Gem Road is part of the project. That's why I brought that up. No, and I only brought up Jim's that project because they're already showing houses there, you know, leading into that road.
Yep.
And I can appreciate the need for there to be proper infrastructure in place to support these projects. And I think one of the comments that were made was where the kids going to school. And then there was a comment about how, you know, higher height of buildings doesn't necessarily correlate to more trips on the road. And actually, it doesn't necessarily correlate to more kids in schools either. Orange County, I was on the impact fee advisory board when they changed how much was charged for high rise versus non-high rise. High rise definitionally is 7 stories and above, more than 70 units in a building. And it is a $307 charge for a high rise unit that gets built. And if it is a non-high rise unit, it is a $5,900 charge because of the impacts that are generated. So the higher the building, statistically, the less children actually are going to schools in those buildings. So some of the things that you'll see, and actually some of the most dense commentary we made in the document itself had to do with those development bonuses and transfers of development rights. How can we capture that allowable density and intensity? I mean, we have in some of our areas literally 2 million square feet of allowable non-residential uses. I mean, never can get built, right? And we're not trying to cram 2 million square feet plus 1,900 units on that one part of our plan. But we aren't able to capture, you know, even a slice of that because of the way some of the code prohibitions wouldn't allow us to take some density and move it to a different character district that doesn't even use it at all in our plan. So it's not as if we're asking for density that folks never contemplated there being. It's density that would have happened, like Joe said, stranded density that cannot be captured as on part of our master planned employment center, for example. And yet we can't use it anywhere else in our overall community, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense for trying to get that dense development in these areas rather than having urban sprawl just keep happening, right? If we're going to concentrate it, let's concentrate it. Let's get those building heights high enough so that we can get the folks in, get the retailers in, decrease the amount of average daily vehicle trips generated, reduce the number of school-age children who are statistically likely to be in those buildings, and be able to have some of those design elements that make it a truly successful project long-term. So I appreciate the suggestion of let's categorize some of it because it's a lot to chew when you read or scroll through it at least. So we can get that back in a fashion that makes perhaps some more logical sense of what we're asking. Again, we just didn't want to give a 200-page justification statement plus 140 pages of red line if the consensus was going to be we're not interested. And we would have just ended it there if that was the case. But we certainly appreciate the dialogue and the willingness to let us submit something else.
All right, Commissioner Howard.
I appreciate your opening comments because it's kind of like the elephant in the room. Everybody knows it's there, but everybody wants to ignore it. You kind of soften the tone. That's good. That you created an environment, a platform of discussion where people can share and partner in a common goal. I don't need to say a lot because a lot of the comments are made here tonight I agree with. And it just boils down to desired state. You know, you hear desired state all the time. Well, Apopka had a desired state when they created the form-based code back when, based on what we thought. The desired state now is today. You have a different desired state, but we both have the same objective, the desired state. That would be a successful project that will live on for years and years and years. So I agree with that, and I fully support the city working with you closely with that attitude of mind.
Thank
That
you.
we have to agree that we are the same team, we have the same desired state. You guys are coming to the party with expertise on how to make that happen, because that's what we want. We want people to come to Apopka saying, there's this place called Wild Oaks, you got to go there.
Thank you,
Just
sir.
like they'll say, I got to go to Winter Park
Yes, thank you.
or Winter Garden. You get it.
I do.
That's what we want. So I appreciate what you're doing, and I support the city working very closely with your team to make this thing happen.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, I think anybody from the public we do have a public comment. Come on up. And then we'll wrap it up.
Roger Zebek at 7 West Main Street. First of all, I just want to say thank you to you guys for embarking onto this amazing project. I just saw it in I think it was the Apopka Voice. Had friends kind of call me talking about it, and I was like excited. So if these pictures that we saw here can come to Apopka, I think that'd be like fabulous, because right now we have to go to these destinations that you guys referenced. So if this can be the beacon to where people start to travel our direction, I think it makes it best for everyone. I know it's been a big thing about Fifth Street, but I think this to blow the doors off of that and just kind of open our area up to something that we've all thought that would happen. And there's been a lot of great discussion. So I know I'm super excited to see it, even thinking about bonding this community. So if it can happen, I think it's just great. So I just want to add that. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else from the public? Okay. Well, I guess we'll close up. I think it sounds like from all of the commissioners and the planning commissioners that I think we all want this to be successful. I think from the public perspective, I think we'd all also agree that I think people are okay with higher densities as long as they get the amenities that they want. So I think there's that. And then obviously infrastructure has been mentioned by quite a few people. So I think infrastructure has to be, and we've got the mechanism to do that. And then second is, people okay with more homes as long as they get amenities that comes with that. And so it's, if we get real heavy residential and very few, restaurants and shopping, then people will be less apt to support the project. But I mean, I know you got a great team, and we're excited about the potential and that you bring to Apopka, and I think we all look forward to seeing how this works out. And so I think to Commissioner Becker's point, let's kind of break it down in some different silos. I would like y'all to just get rid of a lot of this red line. That's silly. I mean, let's be honest. So get rid of all the silly stuff. Let's get down to the things that are important to you.
Yes, sir.
That we can all kind of bring back at the next I guess it would be next time would be at planning. Is there a timeline that you need that is kind of
We'll have to submit a formal application.
right?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's like you've got retailers, you've got people say, we need this to change if we're coming, or I mean, so are we? What kind of time frame would you like it to get all the way through to us? I mean, obviously you got some steps to go, but
can we talk about that and
Sure.
come back to you on that question? It's a
Yeah.
very, very important question, especially if we're going to use Commissioner Becker's framework. So I think we'll need to huddle internally
Okay.
and then come back with a well thought through answer.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming out.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.